Ladies and gentlemen, welcome in the another Q&A session during AfryKamera Film Festival. This time with us we have Ekwa Msangi, the director of the film Farewell Amor. Hello Ekwa, such a pleasure to have you here.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Congratulations for the film. I read in some articles that actually the story behind it is inspired by some relatives from you. So how much of the story has its origin? How much is it rooted in reality and how much is a fiction?
So the story, yes, you're right. It is inspired by an aunt and an uncle who have been separated for 24 years now due to visa immigration issues. And, I've watched them over the years, as it's affected the family, affected their union. I mean, my uncle's been in touch. He had every intention of bringing his family. It didn't happen. And it's affected them. It's been really difficult for them. So this was sort of the imagination of what would happen if my aunt and my cousin finally got their visa and were able to come to the States to meet my uncle. And unfortunately, in a very sad turn of events, just 2 months ago, my uncle died. He had cancer, and so
Really sorry to hear.
the reunion was only at the funeral, unfortunately. But it happens to a lot of people in different variations and not just Africans. And I was just inspired by the sort of imagination of what might happen had they gotten the chance to meet.
Gotcha, because when I was watching your film, I couldn't stop thinking about the fact that actually you have family, but at the same time you don't have a family, that you are close to somebody, but that's, at the same time you stay like completely alien to somebody. You are like completely a foreign person to somebody after so many years. I think that you touch it very, 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 very well on the screen. But it's really crazy that people still are forced to live like that.
Yeah, and for many different reasons. I mean, in my case, it was a visa immigration situation, but there's people who are separated by incarceration, people by military service, by crazy work schedules, by all sorts of different reasons why people might have to live maybe a few months, maybe several years apart. And what does that do? Who is the person that you have to become in order to stay hopeful that you'll reunite? And then when you do reunite, the person that you've become, is there space for that person in the relationship is the question.
Gotcha. But when you were making this film, when you were working on it, did you hope that it's gonna bring like some, that it will be a voice in the discussion, that it will bring some discussion to the American society and to like will bring the awareness that, hi, people are still living like that, but you are not actually aware of it even?
Yeah, at the time that I was working on this project, or initially sort of starting to write the script, was during the early Trump years, where there was so much rhetoric in the media about the evils of immigrants and all the horrible things that they're doing and the resources that they're taking from us, and all of these kinds of things. And it was like, I wanted to, put a face to these, boogeymen immigrants that were sort of being pressed in the news as like, who are these people? And in what world is there that a person would prefer to live away from the people that they love and the culture and the language and the food and the family that they love, to live in exile somewhere? Because it's why, like, nobody would do that unless there was a very good reason for it. And also, like, appreciating all of the things that in all of our communities that immigrants bring, the community, the culture, the languages, the food, the all sorts of different things that immigrants actually bring a lot and sacrifice a lot to be away from their families. And so just wanting to shift the conversation a little bit from the rhetoric that was in the media at that time and still is.
Gotcha. And I also remember that actually, firstly, you started with the short film and then you transform it into the feature. So could you speak up a little bit about this transformation?
Yeah, as I've told you, this is a sort of family story, so it's been on my mind for a while, and I was talking to my producing partner about it, and we had worked together on several short film projects, a web series, a few things, And one of the films that we had worked on received a cash prize that required us to make a short film. And so I thought, okay, maybe I can use that small prize to make sort of a stepping stone and a little bit of a calling card and a mood board to help us get the ball rolling as we started to look for funding and support to make the feature. So we made a short called Farewell Meu Amor. And it's the moment before our lead character, Walter, goes to the airport to get his family. I had only $2,000. It's not enough to shoot in an airport. So we just got a little apartment and 2 actors, and his lover is coming to return the keys and say goodbye. And, you know, so just looking at that small moment, and that actually was really, really useful in terms of getting us to be able to start conversations with investors and different talent to get the feature made.
Gotcha, because it's really interesting that in the short film, the story was told from the perspective of Walter, but in the feature film, you decided to mix it. We have these 3 points of views that really like allows us to look at the situation. It really gives us the bigger image. So was it your idea from the beginning, or how did it look like?
No, it wasn't. You know, Walter was clearly sort of on my mind since I'd done the short about him. So it was easy to start writing his story, but then it kind of felt a little cliche to make a film about a guy who's had an affair. And, you know, we've seen that before, even though it's a little different because he's trying to actually make his relationship work. So then I was like, okay, maybe I'll do it from the daughter's perspective. I can tap into some of my own experiences coming to the US as a teenager immigrant. But you know, because she has a dance element, I was afraid that, you know, a Black young girl doing a dance movie, the movie might be sort of categorized as like an urban dance film and people wouldn't take it that seriously. So then I was like, okay, maybe I'll just do both of their stories because, you know, they're both very different and unique perspectives. And I initially started writing just from the 2, from Walter and Sylvia's perspective. And then as I got into it, it became clear that the mother's story was the linchpin for both of theirs, and it wouldn't make sense to not have hers. So then I started again and included her story, and then, you know, mapped out sort of the places that they intersect and how all 3 of them are experiencing the same event, but having very different and unique experiences of the same event.
Gotcha. And you mentioned actually about the scene at the airport. When I was watching your film, I was also thinking about this dance class scenes, about this scenes when you have a lot of stunts, a lot of people on the set, also the airport scene. So I was just curious, how did you manage to shoot the film in New York, low budget film, and bring it all into the screen?
You know, we hustled a lot. The people at JFK Airport were really, really wonderful to us, and they let us shoot in their biggest terminal and gave us the times when they would have flights coming in from Africa so that we could have some African people, you know, walking through the airport and it would look, you know, genuine. So we were there at 5 a.m. on a Monday to get the flight that comes from East Africa. And, I mean, it happens too when people shoot in the streets of New York, for example, you don't pay everybody who's there. We had a few of our extras that we did pay to be there. And then we just put up big signs as people were coming out of customs to say, we're shooting a film and you're basically giving us permission to have you, you know, wiping our face. That's how we did it.
But that's awesome. That's really good to hear that people want to support filmmakers and want to support the art. Yeah. But also, Ekwa, could you tell me a little bit about your own background? Because as far as I know, you also have this experience of living on 2 continents. You also have that experiment of soaking up with 2 kind of cultures. So could you speak up a little bit about it?
Sure. I mean, I have a very sort of mixed background. My family's from Tanzania in East Africa. My parents came to the US in the 60s and 70s. They were Fulbright scholars. So of my 2 other siblings, I was the one who was born in the US. And we moved back to East Africa when I was about 5. I grew up in Kenya, even though my family's from Tanzania. They had moved to Kenya in the 60s during the first East Africa Union. And so that's where I grew up. And, you know, I grew up at a time when there wasn't any local programming on TV in Kenya. And so it was really frustrating to me to be surrounded by such interesting, dramatic, colorful, funny people and never seeing that reflected anywhere in my surroundings. So I wanted to be a filmmaker in order to change that, you know, because I knew all these great storytellers in my family. And I think being an immigrant in Kenya, you know, it's a neighboring country, but it is a different culture.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel as an immigrant, you have to be a very good observer, because it's a survival tactic to know sort of when the tone of their voice changes. It's like, uh-oh, this might be dangerous, or maybe this is a good thing, when to lean in, when to leave. And so I've always been a very acute observer of cultures, of body language, of movements, of, you know, different kinds of things. And then I left, you know, to come to film school. Spike Lee was the only Black filmmaker I'd heard of. And I did research and he went to NYU, so in New York. So I was like, I'm going to NYU. And I ended up in New York to study film. And this was a time pre-digital, so nobody knew anything about African film. It was just this weird, like, who are these people? What are they doing? It was very disappointing. And it wasn't until I discovered African filmmakers, actually at the very last year of film school, that I was like, oh, I just have been talking to the wrong audience all of this time, and sort of rededicated myself and did a master's to study African cinema so that I would know, you know, the people who had gone before me, and make films that are specifically, in my mind, targeted towards my people, you know, people who are Africans or the diaspora, are certainly lovers of our culture and our people. And that's been a huge game changer for me to come now into this industry in the US, which can be very sheltered for any other culture other than white male American culture, with a film that's about Africans, by an African filmmaker. It's got a lot of music and culture and references that are very specific. But I've been so pleased to find that people have been able to connect to it in ways that I had never imagined. Because, you know, as a young person, as a young filmmaker, I had always been told that nobody would get it. And it seems that people have been getting it. So that's been really, really sweet.
Yeah, but that's really good to hear. And actually, do you see that the situation is changing right now in the US? That right now there is more and more influence of African cinema, that the African cinema is more present than it was in the times that you mentioned, that you didn't even have the access to hear their voices?
Yeah, I mean, little by little, in little places, you know, it always starts with the music, right? People sort of start listening to music. They're not even sure that they're not even aware maybe that they're listening to an African singer, and then it starts showing up in different films or TV shows. And there's a lot of first generation immigrants who work in the industry, in different parts of the industry. Listen, we're not about to take over anything quite yet, and that's true of pretty much everybody. You know, everyone is trying to make a claim, you know, in terms of women filmmakers and Asian filmmakers and everybody, but the landscape has changed hugely, you know, largely because of the introduction of digital media, where there's just the demand for content has increased tenfold. And so, you know, and the idea of, you know, people have a lot of feelings about conglomerates like Netflix, but the fact that you can watch shows from other parts of the world in completely different languages and still sort of be engaged and, you know, and have an idea of how people live there and what they do, what they eat, what they're into, is huge, you know. And so I'm seeing it across the board, not just with African film or filmmakers, but really across the board, where there's this new sort of awareness of, you know, there's a whole other sets of people out here who are doing really interesting things. And it's not just self-centered and self-focused as America has been for a very long time.
Yes, and you are apparently the part of this change, because you did the TV show for the first TV show for.
You mean the agency?
Yeah.
Oh, well, that was That was a wonderful experience, and also a terrible experience, because the show was canceled. We had really bad management as far as the producers were concerned, and so it didn't work. But for me as a filmmaker, one of the really tough things about being a director is that with anything in film, it's an apprenticeship. It's not like you go to school, you get a degree, and now you're a filmmaker and somebody can hire you. They hire you off of the work that you do. And in order to make the work, it requires quite a lot of resources, quite a lot of people and money and, things, to sell everybody on this idea to help you make it. And in the days that I was in school, when we were shooting on celluloid film, it was even more expensive and more restrictive as to who had the opportunity to practice their craft to get better. Because that's all it is. It doesn't matter what kind of fancy school you go to, everybody has to practice their craft and get better. And so I got to do this TV show soon out of school. And as much as the show, didn't live to see the light, it was a wonderful opportunity for me to practice working with actors and working with crews and, practice sort of my muscle and being able to express my voice. And so I'm always grateful for that.
Gotcha. And apparently I'm making fingers crossed for you too, and I hope to hear more of your voice, especially here in Poland. So I hope that at the next edition of AfryKamera, we will see you face to face. Once again, congratulations for the film. I'm really glad that you are showing it to the Polish audience. I was amazed by it during Sundance Film Festival last year. So really, congratulations and thank you so much for finding the time for this conversation.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Thank you for the support.
Thank you, Ekwa. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.